Welcome everyone. We are doing an encore presentation with Greg Nathan. We had a few technology glitches last week, and so we asked Greg to come back and do this over again and help us so that everyone could get on the call. We had hundreds of people that weren't able to access the call last week. So today Greg's going to talk about giving your support office team the skills to create happy franchisees. And I want to just go ahead and read Greg's introduction for those of you who don't know Greg Nathan and who he is and what he's done. This will give you a little bit more background. So as a psychologist and best-selling author, Greg is widely regarded as the leading international thinker on the people issues in franchising. His models of franchising excellence and empirical research into the drivers of franchisee satisfaction have shaped the way franchisors all over the world lead their networks. Greg has been delivering deeply engaging and interactive CEO forums, field manager boot camps, and culture workshops virtually for the last 10 years. And in 2018, Greg was presented with the IFA Crystal Compass Award for Leadership Excellence in Franchising. So welcome, Greg. Thank you so much for doing this with us. I know it's Saturday morning for you, so really, really appreciate it. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Before I do, I want to ask everyone, please put all of your questions, comments in chat. Greg loves the interactivity. So, Greg?
Great, and I'll just ask you, Katrina, if you could keep an eye on the chat for me and just call out anything that's coming through. So we've called the session Creating Happy Franchisees. I know we have folks from all over the world in the session. It's Friday afternoon for the North Americans. It's Saturday morning for Australians and the people down this end. So I thought we'd just start with a fun activity. If you could pop your energy number into the chat feed, please. And it also gets us using the feed. So if you're a 1, you want to go back to bed. If you're a 10, your brain is sizzling with excitement and curiosity on what we're going to cover today, and you can be anywhere between that. So let's see what we've got coming through.
10s, 8s, 7s. I'm a 10.
Fantastic. John was first in. Terrific. So I'm just doing a bit of an average there. So it looks like we're coming in at about 8.1, which I think is pretty good for a Friday afternoon and a Saturday morning. Thanks, everyone. Now, let's look at what we'll cover in the session. We'll talk about why some personal and business relationships are likely to be strained at the moment. It's normal, both at the business and the personal levels. We'll look at 3 characteristics of sustainably great franchise networks. These are networks that have been very successful over 20 years or more. And I've got an interesting question for everybody who is on the call today. We'll share some research on how franchisee attributes and your culture affects the performance of their businesses and the customer experience. We'll take you through a model called the franchise business journey, and we'll talk about the implications of this on how you support your franchisees as they go through this journey. We'll revisit, there's an important thing going on around the world in terms of changes politically and I think ethically, and they've got some implications for franchise sectors around the world. And I want to give you a little case study of what's been happening in Australia. And finally, I'll share some interesting insights into the brain and some implications of this for your franchise relationships. And we'll close with a bit of a story around the franchisee factor, which is a very useful model that many franchisors and franchisees find useful. Now, just before we get into this, given what's going on for you, I'd like you to think about, is there a burning question or an issue you'd like me to cover today? I've given you a bit of a background of some of the topics we'll touch on, but if there is something that's been on your mind that you really hope that I address, please put it in the feed now, and I'll do my best to address this. And Katrina, again, if you could keep an eye on that. Let's just imagine for a moment that we're in this beautiful little boat. It's a calm day, there's a gentle breeze, the sun is setting, and we're sailing across the bay. Now, the hull may have a little rot in it, and there may be some tears in the sails, but they're not going to cause us any problems because everything's calm. But what happens when the rough seas come in and the strong winds start to stretch the sails and the waves are bashing against the hull? We're going to start to get some water coming in, the sails are going to start to tear, and we could soon be in trouble. And the analogy here is that relationships are like this. So when everything's calm and predictable and certain, any underlying tensions can remain. They're not really going to come up and cause any major problems. But under the stress of uncertainty and significant change that we're all experiencing at the moment and will continue to experience over the next 12 months, existing relationships, if there's some weakness there, they're likely to be exposed. And no doubt, many of you would have seen an increase in relationship tensions. Now, I just want to make the point, it's normal during periods of intense change. And I'm not just talking about your franchise relationships, I'm also talking about your personal relationships as well. People have been thrown into close proximity with the lockdowns, and people are locked up with their kids and with their partners, and things can get a little tense. Now, in the franchise relationship, because it is an interdependent relationship, and I define that as you can't just walk away when things aren't going well. You're kind of stuck together, as is a marriage. When this tension occurs, we've got to learn how to manage these relationship strains. And if we don't, we can quickly find ourselves under a lot of stress. Now, you share a brand together with your franchisees, and you also share your passion for your customers and the customer experience. And so we talk a lot in our franchise education sessions about how to manage this interdependent relationship where you're in it together. You can't just walk away. But I want to make the point that the principles that we're talking today about also apply to all relationships. Now, a question for everybody. We've all got a lot of life experience on what's worked when relationship tensions do come up, but most importantly, what helps to strengthen those relationships so we can navigate through these waves of change. So I've got a question for everybody. I want you to think about something you've done recently that would help to maintain a healthy work or family relationship. You can think about your partner, your kids, your colleagues, your franchisees. We may have some franchisees on the call, your franchisor. So what's a simple behavior, an attitude, a strategy, a tool that helps you to maintain those healthy relationships? And pop it in the feed. Who's going to jump in first? Let's see what we've got. Thanks, Jane. So better listening skills. And I love that word, empathy. So important. We talk a lot about the science of empathy in our courses. So Shanna, I'm just going to pick a few, is talking about exercise. Yes, because if we're feeling better physically, we're going to have more energy, and you need good energy to manage relationships. Michael's talking about leave work at work. Yeah, not easy though when you're working from home. So a little tactic we talk about is a transition ritual that if you want to sort of turn off and leave work at work and you are at home, 5 or 6 o'clock or whenever you're finishing up, it actually helps to maybe change your clothes, do something physical like go for a walk, do something that you enjoy, that engages you and stretches your thinking a little bit. And that's a good way to transition from, you might be gardening or cooking or playing with your dog, to transition you out of work mode. And again, that's a nice leading. Joanne has talked about taking the dogs for a walk. That is my transition ritual, Joanne. I take my dog, we run around the park, I leave my phone at home, and I just focus on having lots of fun. Thank you. Thanks, Katrina. Now, I want to talk for just a few minutes about why FRI exists. FRI is the Franchise Relationships Institute, and what we do. So you know where I'm coming from. So I'm a psychologist, but while I was studying psychology, I worked part-time for a small chain of company-owned bakeries. They were called Brumby's Bakeries. And the company was just starting to franchise. This is 45 years ago. And I found this transition from company-owned to franchising fascinating because the franchisees brought a different mindset to the business. And some of the store managers that became franchisees, they also had a whole shift in their thinking. And it was amazing to watch how their commitment and their passion for the business really grew very quickly. And I did continue with the chain. I watched it grow, and a multi-unit franchisee with that group invited me to join him as a partner, and I took up the offer. So I experienced life as a franchisee, and later on I joined the franchisor team. I became a field consultant, and I ended up the head of marketing and operations. And this company ended up to be a public company. And because of my psychology training and background, I was always very interested in the nature of the franchise relationship, because when I was a franchisee, I was often at loggerheads with the franchisor team. And when I joined the franchisor team, I seemed to often be at loggerheads or in conflict with the franchisees, because I'd be wanting them to do something and I was very impatient. And they'd say, nah, we don't want to do that. Why should we do that? And I had the same attitude also when I was a franchisee. I didn't want to be bossed around by the franchisor because it was my business. Now, there was no training, there was no decent books around at that time about how to be a successful franchisee or franchisor. So in 1989, I went back to my psychology and I founded the Institute. And our mission, we take very seriously, is to foster the creation of profitable partnerships in the global franchising sector. We're very passionate about this. We've developed a number of tools, and I've written a number of books just to help you to lower your stress and just to be the best you can be in terms of supporting and serving your franchisees. We've worked with over 500 brands over the years. These are just a few of them, but the one consistent thing I found in all these brands and others is the issues and the stresses that they face are very similar, because we're all in the franchising business, so to speak. And I just want to touch on this concept of being in two businesses, because I made the mistake early on that I think many franchisor executives make. Because I knew everything about baking and selling bread, I thought I could effectively lead and motivate my franchisees. But the reality is that you and every other franchisor executive on the planet, we're in two businesses. You're in the business of delivering value to your customers, but you are also in the business of franchising. And that means putting people into business and helping them to succeed in a way that also works for you. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 characteristics of sustainably great franchise networks. And I would say of all the brands that we've worked with over the years, I'd say about 20% of them would meet this criteria of sustainably great. They've been growing consistently. Franchisee profitability is strong consistently, and it's been maintained. Franchisor profitability is strong, and they've managed to also protect and grow their brands and have that love, that brand passion, not only from their customers, but also from their franchisees. So they've got very strong franchise relationships as well. So let's have a look at the first one, which is ongoing well-managed innovation, and understanding that a franchisor's capacity to innovate, it's always going to outstrip a franchisee's ability to accommodate the changes. So to do this well, we need to understand the characteristics of the sigmoid curve, which you've got on the screen here. I call it the curve of life because it applies to every living thing on the planet. Now we're talking about people, plants, animals, Also, careers go through this curve, and of course, products, it's the product life cycle, and businesses. And what it predicts is that when something new happens in life, like if we start a new job, we open a new business, we introduce a new system into our network, there's going to be an initial struggle. Things will always get worse before they get better. And I always tell franchisees, particularly those who are expanding into multi-unit operations, don't be discouraged if there's a dip initially, because it just takes time to iron out the bugs and the problems. Some of you would have experienced this working from home, when it's all very well to sit at home and put a computer on a desk, but you've got to deal with all the personal stuff that's going on around you. But after a few weeks, I'm sure most of you have settled into a routine there. Now, nothing is forever. So even when things start to grow and we get that traction, if we don't bring in another sigmoid curve, we're going to plateau and decline. So good franchise networks or great franchise networks are constantly taking their network and their franchisees through the sigmoid curve. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about how this applies to individual franchisees in your networks. But for now, I just want to make the point. Constant change is vital for you to stay fresh and relevant. And part of this change is going to be that initial dip. And we call this the perspiration stage. And you need to have trust and commitment of the people if you're leading people through this. And this brings us to the next characteristic of this sustainably great best practice franchisors. And that's clarity of purpose. Now, these franchise companies are crystal clear around why they exist and what their values are. And often this sense of purpose revolves around making a positive difference to the community, and they put all major decisions through a filter, almost like a values filter, as to whether is this going to be right for our long term, not just for the brand, but also for our culture and for the stakeholder groups. Now, by the way, I hope you're taking notes at the moment. I always like to take notes during when I'm in educational sessions, because it helps me to stay engaged, and it means I'm going to remember the important things. Now, I want to raise with you what I think is the single most important question that we could explore together, and that is, who are the most important stakeholders in a franchise network? And I'd like to get your views on this. So, Cassie, could you please put up the poll? And we're going to ask people to pick who they think is the most important stakeholder in their network. So could everybody have a crack at this? Now, there is no one right answer. I'm going to give you a view, but you're obviously entitled to your own experience. Brilliant. So we've got 50% of the group have voted so far. Let's see if we can get it up to over 80%. So I'd like to see everybody. This is anonymous, so nobody knows what you're saying. So we've got 78%, 5 more seconds. We're over 85, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close the poll, Cassie, and let's see what we've got. So the majority of the group, 56%, are saying franchisees are the most important stakeholder. The next most popular one is customers, 29%, and then employees, 11%, and then 4% have said the franchise or management. Nobody voted for the stockholders. Okay, thank you for that. Now let's just explore this a little more, and I want to introduce you to somebody. This is so that was our question. This is Cheryl Bachelder. Now, I interviewed her a few years ago when she was the CEO of Popeye's Chicken, and she previously led Popeye's through 5 years of consecutive same-store sales and market share growth. They'd had a $70,000 net profit improvement per store and a 400% increase in their share price. So she's got some credibility. And they also had a queue of franchisees wanting more stores. Now, she told me the single most important question that her and her executive team tackled when she became CEOs was, and she attributes this to the company's success at the time, was who is our most important stakeholder? And to achieve consensus, They went away on a retreat, they locked themselves up, and they debated this issue. And the marketing officer was arguing it's always going to be satisfied customers. They're the most important stakeholder. The financial officer argued the stockholders actually were the most important group. They own the company and their satisfaction dictates our share price and the value of the company. HR, he said it's the store staff. They're looking after the customers. And the chief operations officer, he argues that it's the franchisees because they're ultimately responsible for the customer experience and the experience of staff. And so they're controlling our growth. Now, after days of discussion and debate, they concluded that the franchisees were the most important group. Now, they figured if the franchisees are doing a great job running the stores and leading staff, customers are going to have a great experience, sales are going to go up, and the stockholders are going to prosper. And she said from that point on, every decision was put through this filter of, is this right for our franchisees or our franchise partners? And this became an integral part of their culture in terms of surveying franchisee satisfaction and consulting and collaborating with franchisees over every significant product and marketing and store design decision. Now, I was excited to meet her and talk about this because I have always argued that if franchisees are doing a great job and they're profitable, everything else just seems to fall into place. This is my experience and this is what our research has shown. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm not saying you're wrong if you say it's the customers. Obviously, they're very important, but I would probably suggest that if the franchisees are not happy and satisfied as a group, you're not gonna fulfill your potential as a network. Now let's look at the third characteristic of best practice, excuse me, franchise networks, and that's a commitment to collaboration. This is associated with this previous point. And what that means, collaboration means co is with labor. This is Latin for work, so it's work with. And it means that we're working with each other to maintain a competitive edge. Now that means that each party has to not only come together on certain things that you've got in common, but you need to focus on the things that generate the most value. So the middle area represents the collaboration zone, if you like, and culture, but the outside areas represent individual areas of accountability. Now, accountability is different to responsibility. You can't delegate accountability. The buck stops with you. So let's start with what the franchisees are accountable for. This would be like a summary of a job description for a franchisee. So they are accountable to create advocates for their business and the brand by making sure they're delivering an exceptional customer experience. Secondly, they are accountable for their profitability by controlling their costs and maximizing their sales every opportunity. And finally, they are accountable to participate constructively in the franchise network by engaging in activities and supporting important brand initiatives. And you need to have these conversations and educate your franchisees about their accountabilities. And we do talks and programs called Profitable Partnerships to teach your franchisees this stuff. Now, as a franchisor team, you have also three accountabilities. You need to lead with credibility. Now, this word is very important. It's not command and control. It means that you are competent in making good data-driven decisions. You're being trustworthy and transparent with information, and you're caring about the personal and business success of your franchisees. Now, you also need to provide relevant support, which means ensuring this matches the evolving needs of each franchisee. I'm going to talk with you a little bit more about this in a moment. And you are accountable to protect the brand. You must not allow anyone to do anything that could embarrass or damage the reputation of everybody else in your network. Now, when I talk about brand, I'm talking about your reputation. Now, before we talk about how to best support franchisees, I want to really make an important point. This is a chart of weekly sales from 4 stores when I was the national operations manager with Brumbies. And I want you to note a significant lift in sales that occurred at a particular point in time. This is going back 40 years ago, but the principle is still the same. This shift in sales, it wasn't driven by marketing or product innovation or changes in store location or design. What changed in each of these stores were the franchisees for those stores. Now, the top one, the blue one, it was a company store manager who became a franchisee. It's quite interesting. And the sales suddenly shot up. So never underestimate the significant role of the franchisee in driving performance. So let me ask you all a question. And I'd like you to put your response in the chat feed, please. If I were to ask you what percentage of a store's overall performance, which is 100%, but what percent of that 100% do you think, on average, is driven by the knowledge, the attitudes, the skills, and the habits of the franchisee, as opposed to the systems, which includes the brand, the location, the processes, and support? So what percentage would you put on the franchisee's contribution to the performance of the business? So throw in a guess. So we've got quite a few 80% coming in. I had one executive, he said 100%. And I said, oh, so that means that your brand and systems are worthless. He goes, oh, 50-50. So we've got quite a high number there. Now, I may have biased your thinking a little bit by showing you those 4 case studies. They're a little unusual, that jump, but I'll share with you what, and thank you, Dana and Monique and Amy and all the others, Steve, for throwing in your thoughts there. I'd say on average, it's around 40% on average. Now, that doesn't mean in some cases a franchisee can't double the performance of a business if it changes, but 40% is hugely significant. Now, location is huge. The strength of the brand is huge. A field consultant can make up to 20% difference to a whole region, we've found in our research. So there are a number of factors that will impact on performance. Now, this relationship between the person and their performance, though, it's one that's really fascinated me for years as a psychologist, and we've done a tremendous amount of research on this. And what I'm going to share with you here is from a study. It's been published 2 years ago in a very prestigious academic journal, which is the Journal of Business and Psychology. Now, 2 attributes in particular that we know drive sales and profitability and a great customer experience, so that's how we would define performance, are the proactivity of the franchisee and their level of brand passion. Now, proactivity is where a person says, if it is to be, it is up to me. I take responsibility and I'm going to take action to make things happen. Brand passion is where the franchisees love the brand. They get excited whenever they have an opportunity to tell someone about what they do and the great work they're doing in their local community and how fantastic their brand is, because that sort of, it's like infectious, it's like a virus, and it infects their staff in a positive way, and then the staff infect the customers with the passion, and that's what drives the loyalty. Now, these 2 attributes each contribute up to 15% each to a franchisee's sales and profitability and the delivery of the customer experience. So that's one element. But what about you? What influence might you have on a franchisee's performance as a support team? So we looked at this by asking nearly 1,800 franchisees from 74 different networks. How supported do you feel by your franchisor team? In other words, whether or not there's a supportive franchising culture. So here's a couple of the questions that we asked the franchisees to determine the extent to which they felt supported and that the franchisor cares about their success. And these come from our franchisee satisfaction surveys that we do. So we can independently survey how your franchisees are feeling in a number of scientifically validated areas that we know impact overall on performance. So here's what we discovered. When franchisees disagree with these statements and they don't feel the love their proactivity and their brand passion drops. It's like you put a blanket on it, and that in turn has a dampening effect on their performance. Pretty interesting, eh? The good news is that when franchisees agree with these statements, and the more that they agree with these statements and feel they're part of a supportive culture, their proactivity and their brand passion increase. And that in turn has a significant boosting effect on their performance. So while, yes, the caliber and the mindset of each franchisee is going to have a huge impact on their success, your approach to the franchise relationship is either going to boost their morale and performance, or it's going to inhibit it. Now, I'm just going to pause for a moment, Katrina, and just see, is there any questions that anyone would like to throw in at the moment before we move on? And please just feel free to pop in a question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Whatever you put in there, I'll make sure that you look like a genius for asking that.
So I don't have any new questions.
Right.
I have a couple of questions that were emailed in before the start of the event, but
Well, we can come back to those perhaps.
yeah.
All right, we'll push on then. I just want to check in with everyone. I hope you're taking notes. I hope this is interesting for you and it's relevant for you and practical for you. Now, earlier I introduced you to the sigmoid curve, and we discussed this in terms of the broader business. I want to now take a look at it in terms of its impact on the business of each of your franchisees and implications for you and those of you who are field consultants and are supporting people and franchisees on a practical level. This is particularly important for you. Now, we start off with what we call the investigation stage. This is where a person hasn't signed a franchise agreement yet. However, they're looking at your brand and your business opportunity, and as such, they have started their journey. Now, they may not join you, they may be looking at your competitors and so on, but if they do join you, whatever you told them, and when I talk about the you, I'm talking about the franchise development folks that are on the call, whatever you've got on your website, whatever conversations they had with your franchisees at the time is going to shape their whole future mindset in your network. And we often find that conflict and disputation that occurs 3 years down the track will often go back to something that happened during the investigation stage. So it's an extremely important part of the journey. Now, when they sign the franchise agreement and they go into your training and development, you're inducting them in, if you like. We call this the initiation stage. Now, they're not going to remember all the technical stuff that you showed them. They're probably going to forget about 70% of it, unfortunately, and you're going to have to review that with them on the journey. However, what they won't forget is how they were treated, and they won't forget the cultural stuff that you went through with them at this stage. So my point is, initiation should largely focus on attitude and culture and making sure people are bringing the right mindset as they begin their journey. And then they're into it. So we call this perspiration. This is where they're sweating it out. This is where the sigmoid curve drops. And it's a very difficult and stressful part of the journey. It may last 3 months, 6 months, 18 months. What will signify them coming out of perspiration is when they hit break even and they start to make money. They start to become profitable. And at that point, we call it consolidation. It all comes together. It's a beautiful experience when you're running a business. And I've been running my business for 33 years now. And I can remember I've been through this stage reinventing a number of times. So consolidation, you've got regular customers coming back, you've got a solid team working with you, you've got consistent cash flow. But nothing is forever, as we talked about earlier. And at some stage, the franchisee or small business owner is going to move into, we call it maturation. And people can burn out if they've been working too hard at something for too long, or they can rust out where they get bored and complacent. And if you don't do something to help them reinvent themselves, they're going to plateau and they're going to go down. Now, the paradox is when they're going into maturation, they can't see it because everything's going okay. And they think, why should I change? So the role of the franchisor is to lead these changes at a system level, but also with every franchisee. And the name we use for this is, just to be consistent with the other terminology, is reformation. If you look up the definition in the dictionary of reformation, it's a significant change for the better. And so I hope this is interesting and useful for you. And when we go into our workshops and our programs, we dig deep into this, and through breakout groups and discussions, we go through each stage and what are the best practices to support franchisees as they move through this journey. Now, I'm now going to touch on something contentious with you, and it's extremely important, and it's happening around the world. And I'm going to just introduce this topic with a model that we often work with in our education and training. It's called the three-legged stool. And this is the three legs of a healthy franchise relationship, and they're all important. The first leg, we call it the legal leg. And this covers off the obligations the franchisee has and the obligations that you have that are written in black and white in your franchise agreements. It also includes legal obligations around health and safety and whatever local laws that apply to your business and the franchisee's business. However, if we just ran our businesses around legal compliance, we'd all go broke. And as we all know, whenever you put a law or something in place, there's going to be a lawyer out there somewhere that's going to challenge it on behalf of a client that disagrees. So we also need to bring another perspective here, and that's the commercial leg. Now, the commercial leg is the reason why franchisees bought into your brand. It's the reason why you decided to franchise. And that is, you want to be profitable, they want to be profitable, you want to grow your market share, they want to grow their business, and you want to get a good return on effort and value, and so do they. So from a commercial point of view, there's got to be equivalent value delivered in terms of return on energy and return on money. However, you and I have seen cases where a franchisor is rolled out a new initiative. It's legal, they can do it. It says in the franchise agreement that they're allowed to do this, and insist franchisees do it. So there's no laws being broken. It makes commercial sense. You've done the research, it stacks up, and you roll it out, and the franchisees, no, I'm not going to do it. Why? Now, the reason is the commercial world is logic, but there's a whole other world, which is the emotional or the psychological world. And in reality, people make decisions largely based on emotional or emotional reasons, and then we justify it later on. And so we need to factor in the psychological leg, which is all about trust and commitment. And it's invisible. And sometimes this is referred to as the psychological contract, and it's all about the implied beliefs and expectations that people have of each other. Now, I could talk for hours about this, but I just want to touch on the importance of this leg, and it's often overlooked. Now, the world is moving through volatile and uncertain times. The franchising sector in Australia has been highly volatile over the last few years. And I know that we're in a different part of the world here. However, what we've been through has relevance for North America and all the other countries in the world. So I just thought I'd touch on this with you. Now, about 5 years ago, there was an investigative journalist called Adele Ferguson, and she targeted several large franchisors for poor conduct in how they were managing the franchise relationship. And one of the companies was a company called Retail Food Group, a large multi-branded publicly listed company. And they were accused, among other things, of loading franchisees up with extra fees, unfair purchasing arrangements, which were making the franchisor highly profitable at the expense of the franchisees who were not making money. And while there was blood on the carpet for RFG, their share price went from $4.40 to 20 cents after all this broke and all these media articles started coming out. The journalists then went after the whole franchising sector, accusing the sector of being a greedy industry that was taking advantage of mum and dad franchise investors. And these articles led to a parliamentary inquiry. So there was a lot of bad media around franchising, and the franchising brand was damaged. And this resulted in a federal government inquiry into the sector. And as you can see, the focus of the report is called Fairness in Franchising. And it really focuses on franchisors needing to be transparent and fair in how they deal with their franchisees. Now, I do believe Australia has been a canary in the mine shaft, and that our experience should be seen as a warning to all countries that transparency, collaboration, and fairness are going to increasingly be raised by governments. In North America in particular, the NLRB is changed over the last few days. You've got a new head. The old head and the old lawyer in there have been removed, and you're going to see some changes going on that are going to impact and put pressure on franchisors to be seen to be doing the right thing here. So I want to make the point that fairness is not just important for building trust in business relationships, it's also a biologically programmed social instinct in all animals. And I think lawyers don't understand the whole legal profession is based on the neuropsychology of the brain and the need for people to have justice and fairness in their lives. And I'll just give you an interesting and perhaps a little funny example here. Now, Professor Franz de Waal, he did some experiments with capuchin monkeys, and these monkeys prefer grapes to cucumber. So to a monkey, a grape is like chocolate, and cucumber is like, it's all right. So what happens when one monkey is unfairly given grapes in exchange for a little task, and the other monkey gets cucumber? So I'll play you the video, and I think you'll enjoy this.
Getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task, and we give her a piece of cucumber and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us, and that's what she does. And she gets a grape, and she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again.
So, unless you want to stimulate rage in your franchisees, you need to be seen acting fairly. Now, humans, we're animals as well, and we share this need for fairness amongst many animals that are pack or social, have these social instincts.
Getting grape and
now we've just completed a major study on franchisee satisfaction with over 7,000 franchisees on what drives what we call the ACE mindset. And this is where franchisees are advocates for your franchise. They're committed to reinvesting in the business, and they're engaged in supporting your initiatives. Wouldn't it be great if we had lots of franchisees with this ACE mindset? Now, the biggest predictor of whether or not franchisees are going to have an ACE mindset or whether or not their expectations are being met. And I'm not just talking about the money that they think they're going to make. I'm talking about how they feel they're being treated, especially around respect, listening, and the big F word, fairness. Now, in this study, we reviewed detailed comments. There are 1,800 franchisees who told us, I do not trust my franchisor. And we asked them why. And 3 factors accounted for 47% of the comments where trust had been broken. And here they are. So self-serving decisions that advantage the franchisor at the expense of the franchisee. So it's not win-win, it's win-lose. A lack of transparency and openness, including where information was seen to be hidden and franchisors were seen to be glossing over mistakes. Now, I wrote an article recently about does admitting mistakes make you a weak leader? And the answer is no. Admitting mistakes makes you a credible leader, providing there's a genuine intention to fix it. And you can't make the same mistake over and over again. You will lose credibility. But just making a mistake, I mean, life and business is about experimentation, and not every initiative is going to succeed in the way you thought. But I think the main thing is say, yep, this is what happened. Here's the facts, and this is what we're doing to fix it. And the franchisees like and respect that. And the last one is not consulting, not listening, not asking franchisees for their input on issues that impact on them. Now, asking for input doesn't mean that everybody has a say in the final decision. It just means that you're taking into account their perspectives. That's a smart thing to do from a business point of view, but it also will bring franchisees into being more engaged. So franchisors need to be very careful of the expectations their franchisees have of them. And this is why the initiation stage that I talked about earlier is so important. So earlier we talked about the franchisee's business journey, and in conclusion, I just want to introduce you to another model, which you may or you may not have been in contact with this, and it's called the franchisee factor. And just before I show you the model, I thought it would be interesting to find out who has heard of the model and to what extent. So Cassie, could we call up the next poll, please? So the question is, how familiar are you with the franchisee factor? Never heard of it, vaguely familiar with it, perhaps very familiar with it, and maybe you're so across it you could teach it. Thank you. So we've got the votes are coming in. Again, this is anonymous, but it'll help me in terms of how much detail I go into on this. So we've got, we're heading up to 70%. Come on, let's see if we can get a few more people jumping in and voting here. How familiar are you with this? Okay, so we'll close the poll. 3, 2, 1, close. How exciting for me. So half of you have never heard of it, and over a third of you are just vaguely familiar with it. Thank you. So I think you're going to find this really useful and really interesting. Now, this is an analysis we did a few years ago. We've got on franchisee satisfaction. So we've got satisfaction on the vertical axis, and we've mapped this. So we've got very high up, very happy, and as we go down, more unhappy. And then we've mapped this against tenure on the horizontal axis. And I want you to notice the trend line. So this is pretty exciting because I had predicted this in a model before we actually validated it back in 1992, based on my practical experience as a franchisee and as a franchisor executive. And here's what the original model looked like. Now, we call it today the franchisee factor, and I'd like to tell you a story, which is my story as a franchisee. So when I started, and the multi-unit owner that rang me and said, would I like to come into business with him? His name was John. And I was filled with glee. My parents were proud of me. I had very clear goals on what I wanted to do with that business. And through our hard work and focus, our sales quickly grew by 25%. Now, 3 months in, John took me through a financial statement or a profit and loss for the quarter, line by line. So we looked at our revenue and we looked at our expenses. And when he got down, there was an expense called MSF. It stood for management service fee. It was over $10,000. And I asked him, what's that for? And he said, that's the 6.5% royalty fee that we pay for the franchisor. And I said, well, what are we getting for the fee? And he shrugged. He said, look, Greg, we just have to pay this. It's in the franchise agreement. But I started to get in my head, what am I getting for my franchise fee? And next time my business consultant, Ian, came to visit, I put the question to him. And he said, Greg, you should be happy because your business is growing. And this is largely due to our systems and our brand. Now, instead of being happy, I was angry because as far as I was concerned, the business is growing because of me. And I said to him, Ian, it's not your systems and it's not your brand. Our sales are growing because I've been here since 2 o'clock this morning baking bread. I've been working with my team. I've been serving customers. And, you know, I take offense at you sort of downplaying my success, which was not his intention. But when we're in the me stage, we interpret everything in a very egotistical way. And this is human psychology. And there's a whole area of psychology devoted to this called attribution theory. What it predicts is that when things go well in life, we tend to attribute it to our genius, our hard work, our good judgment. When things don't go well, it's somebody else's fault. Yeah. And so it's normal and natural in the how this plays out in the franchising context. Now it gets worse. Now, even though my sales are rising, my satisfaction is dropping. Now, I had a lot of experience before becoming a franchisee about baking, and I've got a creative streak. So I started to look to ideas to boost my sales and reduce my cost of goods. And I was at my mum's for dinner, and she served bread and butter pudding for dessert. And the light went off because the main ingredient in bread and butter pudding is stale bread. And I figured if I could recycle the stale bread, which we couldn't sell the following day, into another product, I could get my cost of goods down. So I got in early. I put in, you know, dozens of eggs and sugar and cinnamon and milk. And I made this huge batch of this bread and butter pudding. I baked it off into slices. And I put up paper bag signs with texture pen around the walls of my shop. Bread and butter pudding slice, delicious, 15 cents. I trained my team when they came in to give out free tasters, and by 11 o'clock in the morning, we're sold out. Now, Ian, so I started doing this every day. When Ian came a few days later and he stood at the door of my store and saw the signs and the product, the blood drained out of his face and he was like, "What are you doing?" And he told me I had to stop making the product. When I challenged him about why, he couldn't give me a logical reason. And so I said to him, look, I'm going to keep making this unless you can give me a logical reason why not. And we had a significant dispute. He left the store. He wasn't happy. Now, 2 days later, I received a phone call from the managing director of the company. And he said he was relatively upbeat. He said he thought it was time we caught up and he wanted to take me out for lunch. And I said, Michael, as long as you pay. So that was my way of just giving him a bit of a dig. But he picked me up the following day. We went out to a little cafe and he said to me, "How's it going, Greg?" Now, I'd been obsessing all night about what I was going to tell him, and I was very angry about a number of things. And for 20 minutes, I just vented my anger about our franchise fees were too high, the marketing wasn't any good, we were paying too much for our products, the uniforms were no good, and so on and so forth. Not once did he disagree with me, but what he did, he was paraphrasing back to me what I was saying to him. So just pause for a minute. Are you saying that you think this? So what I'm hearing is you feel this. Now, the point I'm making here, and somebody raised the issue earlier about empathy. Empathy doesn't mean that you agree with someone. It just means you understand their point of view. And the other element to empathy is that you genuinely want to help the other person. So he's listening to me with an attitude of, I want to help you, I'm curious, and I'm wanting to understand, but I don't necessarily agree with you. Now, after 20 minutes, he read back to me 8 points. He'd absolutely nailed my concerns. And at that point, it was amazing how the anger just drained away from me because I felt understood. So he moved me in 20 minutes into what I've called here the C stage, through empathy, through good listening practice. And then we negotiated each of these 8 points systematically. Some things he agreed, some things he disagreed, some things he said, leave it with me, but I felt understood. However, I was ready to go back to the store. I said, you can drop me back now. I was feeling a lot better. But he did one final thing. and this is the final stage of the E factor. He said to me, Greg, we need to find a better way to work together because you've been angry and I'm concerned that this is going to happen again. You're upsetting my staff and you're clearly stressed yourself. I want you to think about, do you really, look, we love you and what you're doing in your business, but if you decided that this is not for you, we'd be disappointed, but that's your decision. But we can't continue with this relationship of conflict all the time. So think it over, give me a call in the next few days, and let's see if we can find a better way. I asked my fiance, who is now my wife of 33 years, Anne, for some feedback after that conversation. And she said, Michael is right. You can be brash and you can be arrogant. I love you, but that is part of your nature. And you probably need to look at that. I got some feedback from John, my business partner. He gave me the same feedback. So I rang the franchisor, CEO, managing director, and I apologized, and we found a better way. And I never went back to that really deep frustration. Now, the point is this, that not every franchisee is going to be as difficult as I was. Some are going to be more difficult. Most are going to have this mild dissatisfaction, if you manage it well, through what we call the zone of tolerance. And the way to strengthen the zone of tolerance is to do all the things that I've been telling you today around credible leadership, relevant support, showing empathy, showing concerns, and so on. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover off today. There's a number of models we've talked about and strategies. Another model that I won't talk about today, we have a whole program for C-level executives called the Franchisor Excellence Masterclass, which revolves around these 5 pieces of the Wheel of Excellence. We've covered a lot of ground, but I thought it would be good if we've got a couple of minutes now to take some questions. So Katrina, any questions there?
Greg, thank you so much. Really amazing, as always. And every time I listen to you, I learn more myself, and had the pleasure of working together with you for over 13 years now. So we do have a question. If people will start putting their questions in as we go through these, that would be really awesome. But we've got a great question about if I were, so from a franchisor, from a fairly large system, I think they have over 1,000 franchisees. I'd be interested to know if you were to prioritize where to start building a culture owners considered supportive. Where would you even start? Given trying to fix everything at once never works. So what's the first step?
Start with the CEO. So as we know, look, culture comes from 2 sources. It comes from the top and it comes from the history. You can't change the past, but you can change the present. So understand the past and acknowledge the past, but you don't want to be ruled by the past. Bring the good things with you from the past, and we need to let some things go. But the CEO must be committed to this idea of credible leadership, where you're leading through influence, through transparency, through showing care for franchisee profitability. And my experience with really good franchisor CEOs is they're very humble in their approach. Often they've had experience with small business themselves, and so they've got that empathy. And so the franchisees really relate to that. And then that attitude starts to filter down. I think training for the franchisor team is absolutely essential. We have what we call a culture of franchising workshop. It goes for 2 hours, 2 sessions for 2 hours, where we take the whole franchisor team through many of the things we've talked about today to educate them in the franchisee reality, the franchisee mindset, and to give them the tools to show more empathy. That's where I would start.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. And I'm glad you brought that up. You've also brought up the CEO masterclass as well. We have, as more questions are coming in, I just want to mention that we've got multiple ways for North American franchisor brands to work with you, Greg. We've got the Culture of Franchising Workshop, which you just mentioned. We've got Field Manager Boot Camps Foundation and Field Manager Boot Camp Advanced.
I love the field consultants, the field managers. They're like the soldiers out in the field doing it. and they need tools and support to do their job well.
Yeah. And those programs are just fantastic. One thing I do want to mention to everyone who's on the call is Greg has been delivering this type of, well, actually not even this type, I would say a much more interactive, much more everyone involved for many, many years. So the whole virtual delivery and creating a kind of very dynamic learning experience for attendees is been in your wheelhouse for many, many years, not just since COVID. So you're one of the best at this, Greg.
I base this on my experience. I can't stand sitting in a session having someone just talking at me. I know I've done a lot of talking at you today, but I've tried to make it relevant for you. But when someone just blah, 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 I want to be involved. I've got experience. So 50% of our programs, and we do this through Zoom, we break you into groups and we get you talking and sharing with each other and also having a bit of a conversation with me. And we find that that's the right balance.
Yeah, it's awesome. Oh, sorry, we've got another question. How do you curb the moving backwards mindset? Things are going well, the culture is moving in the right direction, and then it goes back to the past, which derails the forward trajectory.
Okay, so I want you to write this down, everybody. I want you to write down the letters NEMO, one under the other, like that, NEMO. And I'll give you a little tool called Nemo. Remember the little fish, Finding Nemo? So the N stands for name. So when someone starts to show a behavior or a pattern, or you notice something that's not helpful, you need to name it and acknowledge it. It's like we call the elephant in the room, but you do it with empathy. So the E is for empathy. So you might say something like, look, I understand that, things 5 years ago, you've raised this a few times now about what happened 5 years ago. And I understand that was a difficult time for you. I get it. So you've named with empathy something, but you can't allow the conversation to go down a rabbit hole. You could talk for 2 hours about that. So you need to move it on. So the MO stands for move on. And the way you move it on is you can either ask a solution-focused question, which normally starts with what. So you might say something like, so given that, what is it that we want to achieve now moving forward? Or what can I do to help here? Or what is it that you want? What would make this good for you? Now, if you have a solution that you'd like to suggest, ask for permission first. So you might say, look, given what you've said, I have a few thoughts on how we could take this to a better place. Would it be okay if I shared that with you? And that way you're giving someone the opportunity to have a bit of control of the conversation and invite you to give your point of view. So their mind's going to be a little bit more open, and then you can throw that forward and do it in a little bit of a humble way to say, look, this may not work, but in my experience, I think this could work. What do you think? And what you'll find, that's the way to move a group of people or an individual who keeps coming back or showing any sort of behavior that's not helpful. We talk a lot about this technique in our courses as well, and I can get you to practice it and give you examples.
Yeah, love
I
that.
hope that's useful.
Thank you. Let's see. So we've got a lot of accolades coming into the chat about the content being so relevant and how you're coupling psychology with business issues and really making it make sense. So thank you for that. I kind of think this one might be one of the most important questions that came in earlier. What's the best way to support a franchisee who's really freaking out? Like if you've got someone who's just on the high wire.
Most of them at the moment.
Yeah, right. That's why I thought this question would be really good right now.
And I don't mean to be rude here, but when COVID hit, and this is going on earlier in the year, I rang all my CEO clients, and a lot of them said they were literally pooing their pants about what was the fear and the uncertainty. And this is not going away anytime soon for a lot of people. Some businesses are doing well, and that's great, but the majority of the businesses are struggling. So again, Nemo is the technique that I would use. I would acknowledge the difficulty. I would acknowledge the stress. And I would acknowledge your concern as well. So name also how you feel, to say, I'm very concerned about you. I really want to help you. and I can see the stress. So you're showing the empathy and you're naming what's going on, but in a calm manner. So you need to set an example. And this is where and we'll give you techniques in the courses as well about how to get yourself in a good position to have these conversations. And then you need to start having solution-focused conversations with the person. Like, tell me, like, in the past, what's worked well when you've been through a situation like this? Because most people have been through stresses before, and they've probably tried things that are working. So get them to take some responsibility about what could work. And then again, if they don't have any ideas, you can come in and say, look, I've got a few suggestions that might be helpful. Let's just throw around some ideas. Your care and your love and consideration for someone is the most important thing to settle them down. When people feel supported and validated, you bring out a whole level of energy and empowerment in those people. And that's the difference that makes the difference. You can't just go in and be prescriptive and tell people what to do. They won't listen to you.
Right.
You've got to bring them along.
Thank you for that, and I totally get, because there's a level of shock and PTSD and reactivity, and if you can't move through that emotional state to get the rational brain to click on, you can't create a solution.
Right.
So
check in with them also. So like a week later, you get on the phone or you make a meeting and say, hey, I just want to know, how's it going?
Great.
And particularly, some people are at danger of suicide when things go really bad, and you need to keep a close eye on this. You have a fiduciary duty as a franchisor to look after the well-being of your franchisees, I believe. And so some groups have EAP or some sort of counselling support for franchisees that are really tipping into that level of, I'm so distressed, I just feel I want to check out of life. And that's a terrible thing.
Yes, it is a terrible thing. And I know too that we have quite a few clients that are offering online courses with stress management and mindfulness and, really like just coping skills for our current environment for where we are. So,
and one of the things we measure in our franchisee satisfaction surveys is the level of stress that the franchisees are under. And I think at your conferences and sessions, it really makes a lot of sense to have speakers and round tables. It's probably even more powerful. Get them talking in round tables around what are they doing to manage their stress and manage their home situations. They find that particularly useful.
That's great. That's a really great tip. Thank you for that. I'm going to post that on LinkedIn. If with your permission, Greg. It's awesome. Okay, do we have time for one more question?
Sure, we have gone a little over, but people can go if they want to, but I'm happy to stick around.
Okay, let's do one more question. I've got a personal curiosity around this as well, because as you know, I was a franchisee, and reading chapter 8 in Profitable Partnerships really transformed my relationship with my franchisor at the time. But what are the typical timeframes that a franchisee moves through the stages of the E factor? Is there any predictability there?
Right. Look, it's from the sublime to the ridiculous. I signed up a franchisee, and so he moved from the glee stage to the free stage in 3 minutes. Because once he'd signed the agreement, he said, all right, now I'm going on my honeymoon and I want you to put in staff to run the business for me. And I went, what? He said, oh, you said you'd help with my staffing. I said, no, we'd give you systems. We're not going to staff your business for you. And he never forgave me for that. So that was quite funny. If it wasn't, well, it's probably a bit sad and funny. For most people, it's around about 18 months to 2 years. But I've seen franchisees in the glee stage for 5 years, and then something happens that triggers it. It's normally an event that happens that triggers resentment. And if that trust and commitment's not there, then they quickly go down. Now, just another statistic that you may find useful. In an average network of 100 or 1,000 franchisees, we find around about 18% of the franchisees will be in that free stage. And they'll hopefully move on, and then another group will come through. So that may be reassuring. And we measure this in our surveys as well. If that figure goes up to 25-30%, that's problematic, and an intervention may be needed.
Okay, great. Really, really great, Greg. Thank you so much. And thank you again. We've had several people make a comment about thanks for redoing this. Whoops, there you go. So really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Just want to let everyone know that you can sign up for Greg's tips. He does, typically it's every other week, every 3 weeks or so.
Every 2 weeks I put out, it's educational and insight or some research.
Right. We and the tips are really great, and as you and many of you know, we also often will send those out in franchise speakers email communication. We also can help you with bulk purchases of any of Greg's books that are here on the screen. We hold a small stock here in Boulder, Colorado, but can do bulk orders. We have some systems who've literally done a print run of profitable partnerships of over 6,000 copies to distribute to every one of their franchisees. And then again, also we've got these wonderful programs, virtual learning programs that Greg and his team offer. And there's just lots of ways to work with you, Greg.
Of course, like Katrina is our agent for North America. So if you want training and support, you contact Katrina and she'll do all the work and look at your needs and so on and make sure that we do the right program for you.
Great, great. Well, I don't
With your permission, because we're talking about transition rituals, and I'm going to transition out of work because it's Saturday morning to my sort of enjoyment Saturday mode. And I often use my guitars. I've got 40 guitars. And so I'm just going to play us out. Is that all right?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
Yeah, I'm just going to say thanks to everyone for joining us, and we'd love to see you next week on Speak Spark with Michelle Rowan from Franchise Business Review. We're going to be talking about their Franchising at Work survey. And Greg, thank you so much for giving over your Saturday morning for us.
Pleasure. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.